A few days ago, I took the bucket off of the PC35 here and put an attachment on it that I had built a few years ago, a plate that simulates a bob tack off of a bobcat or a skid steer. And I had that designed several years ago along with this wood splitter. Usually they make them up to mount right to an excavator, but I had them make it up to mount to the bobcat, and then a plate made up that I could adapt from the excavator to the skid steer mount. Well, I put that plate on there the other day with the idea of using it to hook up my forks that I have for the bobcat, and I had some stuff that I had to move back here behind the house. It was back in a mucky spot that was too mucky and too mushy to get to with the bobcat, and it did work for that, but that teleforks was just too heavy for this little excavator, for this machine. It was all it could do to pick the boom up with that thing attached to it. Fortunately, what I had to move was a bunch of styrofoam, and so we could stack it up pretty high. It was pretty light. There wasn't much difference between moving the loaded forks and the empty forks on that. Well, anyway, all the ideas that I had for using that teleforks on this excavator for different things around here all went up in smoke when that happened. So now what I've done is I brought this excavator down and I hooked up the wood splitter to it. And this wood splitter is a humongous piece of equipment. It's made for a heck of a lot bigger machine than this one. It's 1-inch steel plate and a great big, I don't know what size that piston is or what that cylinder is on there, but it's a big old hydraulic cylinder. So it fit okay on the bobcat, and we used it on the bobcat for quite a while. The problem with the bobcat is you got to spin around so much you tear up the ground with it when you're moving from one piece to another, and it worked, but like I said, you had to move around a lot with the bobcat to get wood and stuff, and it would tear the ground up quite a bit. But the bobcat is not in ideal shape right now. It's got a major hydraulic leak someplace, and I don't really want to use it around here any more than I have to. So I've got this hooked up on here. I've got to disconnect the thumb and get some couplings to use to hook up the hoses for the hydraulics on here. I wished I had a switch that I could mount on there onto the boom so I could just hook the hydraulics into that, where I could switch between the thumb and the wood splitter. That would be kind of nice to be able to use the thumb on this, but I'm just going to have to tie the thumb up, hold it up, and disconnect the hoses to that and hook them up to the wood splitter. Well, this is what I've got going on here. I've got a bunch of logs. This is stuff that we had on our property over across the street. It was in the way where it was at for what I needed to do up behind the house. So I moved it down around here. Well, of course, now down here it's in the way for working on the house down here. But I need to get it split up, cut up and split up and stacked in the woodshed so it can get dried up for next winter. And so that's what I'm going to do. I've got 4 logs laid out there right now. They got a little bit of muck on them for moving them around. I didn't get any on them when I hauled them out because we did it in the winter when the ground was froze up and there was snow on everything, and they stayed pretty clean there. But they laid up here in the mud, and then getting them out of there, of course, the machinery I've got just is marginal on handling this stuff, so they kind of got in the mud a little bit. I've got rocks on them and stuff, so I've got the pressure washer out. I'll go ahead and get it going and wash those off and get as much of the rocks and mud off of that as I can. And I just put a new carburetor on my Husqvarna 372, so it's all ready to go. I sharpened it up and it's all ready to go to start cutting that stuff up. I'll get these 4 cut up, and then I'll get the excavator hooked up and I'll bring it down. I've got the trailer sitting right there, and I can pick the rounds up, split them, and set them right in the trailer. And then I'll take the trailer down and back it up to the woodshed and dump it out there and get it stacked up in the woodshed. So that's the project for the time being. that's a spruce log. I'm not going to cut that up for firewood. That's a good, pretty good piece of wood there. I don't like spruce to burn. It has too much pitch in it, too much creosote in it when it burns. It doesn't have much food value. Doesn't have much heat in it, like hemlock. So I'm going to save the rest of that. Yeah, it's still got good wood in it, even though it's starting to show a little bit of rot out here on the edge. It had mushrooms coming out of it. This heart of it is still good, so I'm going to go ahead and save that and set it over there in the pile. I think this one's spruce too. I'll go ahead and cut a chunk off of it and make sure. I guess that one's hemlock. I hit a rock or something and my chain is dull. So I have to sharpen that back up. I picked up that one log and stuck it up in the log deck. It's a pretty good log. This one is probably the next log up on that one. It's a spruce too. Anyway, it's rotted in a ways from both sides, but it's still got a good heart in it, so we can still get some good lumber out of it, timber or something like that, 4x4, 4x6. If it was a hemlock, I'd cut it up for firewood, but I don't like spruce for firewood, so I'll go ahead and pick that log up and put it out of the way too. I cut off both ends of it so I could see what it looked like. It had mushrooms growing out of it and stuff like that. And it's got some pretty good checks in it. It's got some spiral grain to it, but it's got a good heart in it, so we can box the heart and make a couple of pretty good boards out of that, timbers out of that. Of course, this next one here is definitely a hemlock. Spruce don't go hollow like that. They just rot from the outside in or wherever, and that hemlock is typically rotten hollow in the middle. Make a water pipe out of it. So anyway, that one will be a good one. I got to go dig up some gas and some oil for the saw. Alright, well there's one nice hemlock. Could have made lumber out of that, but that's a pretty piece of wood. It'll be nice firewood there. Gonna have to adjust the idle on the saw a little bit. It's not the idle mixture and the idle, it's not staying idling all the time. And you need to let it idle down a little bit after you get done cutting like that so that it cools everything off, gets enough airflow through it to cool it off. Don't want to just shut it down from a full hard run like that. So this tree, you can see the growth rings in it. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, probably 15 of them out to this point, and then they just start getting narrower and narrower closer together as you get out here. You can't hardly see, some places like here, you can't hardly see a difference in them. Well, I can't see how old that is, but it's kind of interesting because it grew pretty fast there for the first 15 years, then it slowed way down. And that could be for any number of reasons. It could be because the growth of the trees around it closed in around it and shut it down. Could be because the climate changed. There's any number of reasons that it could be that it dropped down like that. Most probably it started growing, it probably no trees around, it started growing, grew up 15 years, and then all the trees around it got too close together and shaded it, closed in on it, and it slowed its growth rate down. As you can see, trees growing out in the open where there's no other trees around them, they grow up pretty fast, and they'll get, well, they have great big honking limbs on them, and they're real limby. They grow up, they're big on the butt, and they'll taper up as they go pretty fast. but they'll have great big growth rings in them. Doesn't always have to do with the climate, at least not the weather.
That thing's heavy on that poor little excavator.
Not near as heavy as that Teleforks was.
Yeah.
Well, I got all those logs cut up into firewood. I didn't do as well as I thought. I thought I had a jackpot of hemlock. It turned out most of them were spruce. And I saved out 3 little logs there that I can salvage. One of them's pretty good. The other 2 got a little bit of rot in them. And these others were bigger, but they just had more rot in them. And it got to the point where they just weren't worth trying to salvage. I might have been able to get something out of them, but it would have been more work than it's worth, so I just went ahead and cut them into firewood. I can use them in the hangar. I've got some hemlock there. I did that a couple days ago. I didn't get right back to it like I thought I would, because poor me, I had to go flying. I've got the wood splitter hooked up on the Bobcat. I had it sitting on there for a couple of days now, but I didn't have the hydraulics hooked up to it. I needed to get some caps to cover these fittings on the thumbs. I'm using hydraulics that were plumbed into the thumb to operate the wood splitter. So I got some caps to cap those off, and I got a strap to wrap around the boom here to hold the thumb up while I'm using everything else. I'd already had the wood splitter plumbed in to the Bobcat, so I had Bobcat quick attaches on there. I had to dig out some new ones to put on these hoses and make fittings and everything to flip on these hoses that were on the thumb. So I've got those hooked up. Probably gonna have to do with these, something with these to hang them up here or something so they're out of the way. For the Bobcat, I had to get longer hoses on there to fit on it to reach the couplings, and now I've got plenty of hose on there now. I'll probably hang down into something there and get all chewed up, but we'll see if it's going to work. Well, that's going to work pretty good, I think. Just kind of the way I'd hoped. That wood splitter is awful big for that machine. To get it out there full extent, and it starts bouncing it around pretty good, but I turned it around so the blade will be down on one end of it and help stabilize it, but it's working okay. As I thought, I'm going to have to do something with those hoses to get them up, get them out of the way, and get them armored or something. Anyway, get them up to where they're out of the way. I'll see if I can get some bungee cords or something to get them pulled up there so they're not flopping around like that. Otherwise, it was working pretty good. For as big as that ram is and everything, the knife blades on that and the pad that pushes it into it are on the small side, and I've known that for a long time. For the size of wood that I do, everything would be more efficient if we had twice as many or twice as big of surface area on the knife and the pad that pushes into it. So what my intention here is now, see, I grabbed those and I can move them around pretty good. The intention here now is that I can grab those blocks, split them, and then actually load them right into the trailer there, and then I can just take the trailer, back it up to the woodshed, and just dump the wood out right there in front of the woodshed. That's a heck of a lot easier than splitting it by hand. I used to be able to split that by hand pretty quick, but it's pretty tough on my old body anymore, and then moving all that stuff. I'd have to move the Bobcat around 100 times and make a big mess, and then get out and pick the wood up by hand to stick it in the woodshed or to load it up. But this is working pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the way that's working. The less we have to handle that wood, the easier it is on my back. I got that top pile whittled down pretty good. I got that trailer just about full. I'm going to split a few more pieces and put in there, and then probably take that and go load it in the woodshed. Well, here's what I got. I say this is a pretty good trailer load. I could get a lot more in there if it was stacked up nice and neat, but I put racks in there. The trailer capacity is not exceeded as far as a weight, but that's a pretty good load. That trailer is 16 foot long and 7.5 foot wide, the dump box on it. So that's, and 2 foot high. The walls are 2 foot high. So anyway, you figure out the cubic feet of that. That's a pretty good load. Well, there's the woodshed. It didn't quite fill it up. Got 2 good ricks in there. Had 1 rick already on the back side of wood from before, stuff that I bought, and then stuff that we cut that wasn't quite dried enough. I wanted to season a little bit. And then we had a pile of this stuff that we cut over the winter here, some of the alder and some of the pine out of the muskeg, the dead stuff. We moved that stuff out of there, and so we'd have room for all of this. It's amazing how when you get that stuff stacked up properly, it doesn't take up near as much room as you thought. I thought we were going to more than fill that woodshed up with that trailer load that we had, but we got one good rick in the back and then this partial one out in the front. And of course the woodshed slopes up as it goes, so each rick will be a little bit higher than the one behind it, but we got it jammed in there pretty good. So that should give that stuff a chance to dry out real good. If we had weather like this all summer long, it'd dry out pretty good, but we don't always get weather like this. But anyway, it's stacked up. It's got plenty of aeration in it for getting airflow through it, so it should dry up and be usable by this fall or this winter when I need it. Anyhow, that's good. That woodshed looks a lot better with full of wood. I wished it was all good hemlock instead of mostly spruce, but beggars can't be choosers. That's what we got. We got the first load of wood down in the woodshed all stacked up. I come up and cleaned up the rest of that wood, got it all split up and stuck in the trailer there. Can't try to get down the woodshed right now. My son parked his car there and do a little maintenance on it and found little problems with it. It's going to have to sit there for a while. So anyway, it's all done. It's all loaded up and we'll get that much out of the way.